Most people live in a quiet state of desperation. As Thoreau wrote, but today, it's no longer a quiet desperation. It's desperation, dressed up, in productivity, in a smile, in memes, in everything's fine. And in this desperation, there is no longer silence. There's a cry from the soul that no one hears because everyone is crying quietly. Every day you wake up and repeat the rituals, work, tasks, waiting for the weekend. Is this still life, or just mechanical reproduction of survival? We say, we create value, but what are we really creating? Sometimes I feel like the only thing we're producing is distance from ourselves, an escape from the silence in which we would have to ask, why? Camus wrote that Sisyphus is happy because he understands the absurd. But what if we don't want to understand it? What if we push the stone up the hill and say it's passion, career, fulfillment? But we know the stone will fall. It always falls. But we don't want to see the absurdity in it. We prefer to think it makes sense, because if it doesn't, what's left? Religion used to give meaning. Today, what? Productivity, personal development, therapy, coaching, series. The illusion of meaning has changed costumes. It used to be God. Today, it's a meditation app, the hashtag grateful, and a podcast on self-improvement. But the feeling of emptiness returns every night, after every success, after every motivation, because it's not meaning but it's hologram. From the outside everything works. You pay the bills, go to work, pick up the kids, but inside, something is burning out. It's not depression, it's something deeper. Existential anemia, a soul that stopped speaking because no one is listening. Maybe not even you. Normal life. It sounds safe, but who determines what is normal? Maybe this normality, 8 hours of work, 2 hours on Netflix, 5 minutes for the question who am I, is a subtle form of violence, imposed by society, repeated by family, internalized by ourselves, as if you had a soul that doesn't fit any format. Being alone in a crowd is another kind of emptiness, a deeper one, because it's not about the lack of people, it's about the lack of depth. Small talk about the weather, but never about death. How's it going? But never do you feel that your life has meaning. Silence doesn't hurt, but superficiality does. It's not about quitting everything and running to the Beshadi mountains. It's about stopping pretending, about acknowledging the absurd, and despite that getting up. As Kierkegaard wrote, the greatest suffering is that I cannot die, but maybe the greatest act of courage is to live without illusions. Sometimes all it takes is one glance, one sunset, one moment when you feel you're truly breathing. It doesn't change the world, but maybe it changes you, and maybe that's enough. Not big ideas, not revolutions, just micro-awakenings, like stepping out of the matrix for a moment, seeing, and coming back, a little different. Maybe what hurts isn't a sign of disease. Maybe it's a reaction to a world that itself is sick. Maybe your sensitivity isn't weakness, but a lie detector. The more it hurts, the more you know it's not your path. And in that pain, there's a clue, not a solution, but a direction. I don't have a solution for you. I don't have a beautiful ending. I only have this. Maybe you don't need to give life meaning. Maybe all you need is to be present, to breathe, to see yourself without masks, and to acknowledge, it hurts, but this is me, and that's already something. Maybe even everything. But maybe it's not just about meaninglessness. Maybe that meaninglessness is the only honest response to a world that makes us pretend every day. Because to truly live, you first have to wake up. You have to go down to the very bottom of that inner silence, where there are no excuses, projects, plans, or a performance. There, where only you remain, your helplessness, your fear, your exhaustion, and the only question that really matters: what's next? This is not depression. This is not a defect. This is a true confrontation with existence. And maybe that's why philosophers like Kierkegaard, Camus, and Simone de Weil spoke not of happiness but of truth. Because only in the moment when you stop playing does something real begin. It can be lonely, it can be brutal, but also liberating. You begin to notice the small things: the taste of tea, the movement of light on the wall, the face of an old woman on the looking out the window with something that seems like peace, but maybe it's just resignation. And then you realize that it's not about big answers, it's about the courage to exist in defiance of the absurd. Not arranging the world into a simple, meaningful sequence, but enduring its chaos and maybe even loving it. Not to fix it, but to be part of it, consciously, mindfully, honestly. Because maybe there's a form of freedom in this, in that you no longer have to play. Freedom without a goal, without structure, without a plan for success. Just you and what is happening now, and that's enough. It doesn't mean you won't suffer. It doesn't mean everything will suddenly be beautiful. It just means that you're not running away, and that's revolution. Not because you're changing the world, but because you stop getting caught up in its illusion. You begin to live on your own terms. Even if on your own terms only means a quiet walk towards something you can't yet name. You don't have to know who you are anymore. You don't have to prove your worth. You can simply be yourself, with everything inside you that's cracking, buzzing, fighting, and silent. And maybe, just maybe, it's then that meaning starts to appear on its own. Not as an answer, but as present. But right there, in that total darkness, something peculiar sometimes appears. Not always light, rather a crack, a fissure in the structure of everyday life. A moment of misalignment. A moment when reality stops pretending that everything makes sense. It could be the death of someone close, or a moment when you sit on a bus, look out the window, see your reflection in the glass, and think, who am I really? Or when you realize that a year has passed and you can't remember anything that truly moved you. It's then that the existential question arises, not asked out loud, rather sensed in the body, in the tension in your neck, in the sleeplessness at 3 a.m., in the empty stare at the phone screen, which no longer offers comfort. And you know the question is not what should I do with my life, because that would be too simple. It's does this life even belong to me? Am I its author, or just the executor of someone else's plans, someone else's expectations? Maybe I'm not a human, but a social function, a product of psychological conditioning, who thinks they have free will but acts exactly as they've been programmed. These aren't questions you ask at parties, but it's these questions that begin to dismantle the structure of what we called normal. And right here an awakening can appear, not a sudden enlightenment, more like slowly regaining feeling after years of numbness, like someone taking you out of the freezer and your body slowly beginning to remember that warmth exists. It's a difficult process, because with feeling, pain returns. Everything that's been suppressed, sorrow, anger, disappointment, the need to be loved, it all begins to surface. This is not an awakening that brings peace. It's more like a crack in the wall, through which you begin to see the true shape of your existence. And no, it's not aesthetically pleasing. It's raw, brutal, but true. And maybe that's what it was all about. Not to find happiness, not to be the best version of yourself. Maybe it's about something simpler, to finally stop lying to yourself. Because only when you stop pretending everything is fine, can you start changing anything. Maybe true freedom is not that you can do whatever you want. Maybe it's that you stop being afraid of what you feel. And then, slowly, you start making space for silence, for yourself, for those emotions you didn't want to know, for the questions you feared. And maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of a life that no longer feels like a simulation. And there are those who can no longer scream, not because they have nothing to say, but because they no longer believe anyone is listening. People who pass you on the street with an empty stare, who can laugh at work, talk on the phone, click like under a friend's vacation photo, and at the same time feel their souls slowly breaking apart. This is not dramatic exaggeration. This is reality, just dressed in normalcy. This is a generation that knows no one will come to save them, that there is no hero, that there will be no movie with a happy ending, that you have to get up on your own, even if it's by groping, from knees no one noticed were scraped. That's why loneliness hurts differently today. It's no longer just a lack of people, it's a lack of meaning in their presence. You can be surrounded by dozens of faces and still feel non-existent. And what is presence, if there is no truth? And what is a conversation, if every word is a mask? The modern person does not suffer from a lack of comfort. They suffer from a lack of authenticity, a lack of depth, a lack of connections that are not transactions. We live in a time when everything is up for exchange: work, love, the body, identity, and even memory. Nothing is permanent. Everything is temporary. Everything is functional. Everything is for use, even emotions. You're supposed to feel but not too much. You're supposed to be sensitive but productive, authentic, but in line with the algorithm. You're supposed to cry but only if it can be sold as content. But a human is not a code. They are not an advertisement. They are not a product. That's why they break, quietly, inside, like glass no one hears, because its screen doesn't fit the aesthetics of the feed. And that's where the deepest despair is born, not in tragedy, but in mediocrity, in the gray repetitiveness, in a life that doesn't hurt enough to quit, but doesn't offer anything worth chasing. It's a mediocre life, a life to endure, not to love. But in all of this, somewhere very quietly, a question may arise that changes everything. What if I have nothing left to lose? Not as a gesture of despair, but of freedom. Because if I no longer have to pretend, I can start to be. If I no longer have anyone to please, I can stop deceiving myself. If I expect nothing from the world, I can start creating my own. It's not about revolution. It's not about changing the system. It's about a small rebellion against passivity, against emptiness, against the daily suicide of the soul. It might be a small decision: turn off your phone, stop making excuses, start writing, or be silent, or simply go into the forest, and for an hour, don't pretend anything. It's these moments, small, unnoticed by the world, that are the revolution on the individual scale. Because in a world that keeps saying, be someone, the greatest act of courage might be to say, I don't want to be anyone but myself. And maybe only then truly do we begin to live. But let's say it out loud. There's another dimension to this absurdity, the fear of joy. This is no mistake. Many of us are afraid of happiness, not the empty, Instagram feel good, but that true quiet satisfaction. Why? Because happiness comes with risk, with loss, with an end. Because when we finally love something, a person, a place, a moment, we begin counting down to its end. Because if we finally want something, it means we might lose it. So it's better not to get attached, better not to get excited, better not to want too much. Better to pretend we don't care. But that's not peace. That's numbing. It's poison slowly administered in microdoses, apathy. In this world that keeps saying produce, act, achieve, we rarely talk about loneliness, but it's everywhere. Silence in the house after work, the sound of the elevator echoing down the empty hallway, a plate for one, and no messages worth waiting for. But loneliness is not just the absence of another person. It's also the absence of a conversation with oneself, the lack of courage to ask, what do I really want? Am I really where I should be? Is this the life I wanted? In loneliness, if we have the courage, we can hear the truth, and that's when the philosophical journey begins. Not in books, not at universities, but in the kitchen, at 2 in the morning, when you finally stop playing someone you've never been. Every day is a micro act of surrender. Agreement to something we don't want, silence where we should scream, work that destroys us but provides insurance, a relationship that hurts but is better than none, a mask that burns, but without it, we're naked, and then we reward ourselves with fast food, a series, scrolling, and no, not because we're lazy, but because we're destroyed, tired of playing, tired of pretending that everything is okay. Meanwhile, true philosophy doesn't ask how to be happy. It asks, does your life have meaning? And meaning is not a smile, it's not passion, it's not success. Meaning is the moment when you know you're not betraying yourself, even when everything else is falling apart. And here we come to the most dangerous idea, that you can live on your own terms, not according to the script, not according to expectations, not according to the market. Camus said, rebellion is an affirmation of existence. It means, if I'm already here, if I'm already living, then at least I'll make something real out of it, even if it hurts, even if they exclude me, even if no one understands it. This is not optimism. This is not coaching. This is the brutal act of standing up to the world and saying, my life will not be your product. And then amidst the chaos, something rare may appear, authenticity, not as a goal, not as a brand, as a side effect of courage. Some will say, but what should I do? Change everything? No. Sometimes revolution begins with small things. Don't pick up the phone, Eat slowly. Ignore expectations. Say no. Say I don't know. Cry. Be silent when everyone is speaking. Tell the truth when everyone is lying. These are forms of resistance. These are our daily philosophical acts. Small, quiet gestures that say, I'm not buying into this game. Gestures that don't get likes, don't build a personal brand, but save the soul. So yes, maybe life is absurd. Maybe the world makes no sense. Maybe our attempts are laughable. But maybe that's exactly why we are free. Because if everything is random, we can choose anything. If no one knows the meaning, we can create our own. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that you woke up today, that you made coffee, that for a moment you felt. Maybe that in this world of dead stares and plastic ideas is the revolution. Don't live to act. Don't live to achieve. Live to live. And if you manage to do this even for a moment, you're further than most. Because the hardest thing in a world full of illusions is to be real. But maybe in all this chaos, in this disordered tangle of days that have no clear beginning or end, that's where space appears. Not the kind you can fill with products, plans or self-improvement. Just the kind that remains when everything else falls apart. Because maybe you have to fall apart sometimes to finally start listening. Not to gurus, not to meditation apps, not to motivational phrases on Instagram. Just to yourself, that strange voice that appears when the noise fades away. It may be a voice that has no answer. It may only ask, but just the fact that it asks means that something inside you is still alive, still searching, still not fully accepting the script the world handed you like a pamphlet. Learn, work, pay bills, die. And it's precisely when this voice begins to break through the noise that something strange happens. Not necessarily spectacular. This is not catharsis. This is not a film. This is not a moment for a quote. It may be an ordinary walk with no destination, or tears on the bus, or sitting in silence with someone who doesn't need to say anything. It's a small crack, as if you momentarily stepped outside the system, looked at it from a distance, not to fix it, just to remind yourself that you are more than its cog. Maybe that's where true freedom begins, not the spectacular, revolutionary kind, just the quiet one. Freedom from the compulsion to be someone else, from the inner supervisor who constantly repeats, this is not enough, you are not enough. What we call burnout, anxiety, depression, is sometimes not pathology. Sometimes it's a very rational response to a world that has lost its mind, a world that expects you to be constantly productive, even if you're empty inside, a world that says, take care of yourself, and then punishes you when you take a break. Maybe you're not sick, maybe you're aware that something is wrong here, that the rhythm they make you dance to is not your rhythm, and that the emptiness you feel doesn't come from the fact that something is missing. Maybe it comes from the fact that for years, you've been filled with things you never needed. Someone once convinced you that your worth depends on how much you achieve, how much you earn, how you look, how many people admire you. But the truth is, most of the people we truly love, we don't remember for their achievements. We remember them for simply being able to be present, for their presence, being a refuge. And you, when was the last time you were truly present? Maybe meaning doesn't lie in finding some great mission. Maybe it's about living as if every encounter were important, as if every gesture mattered, as if the world were not a complex mechanism but a delicate fabric that tears when we stop seeing each other as people. Sometimes the deepest philosophy is not found in books. It's found in the moment you stop, look someone in the eyes and don't run away. Not to the phone, not to words, not to masks. And though it may sound naive, maybe simplicity is the most revolutionary, because the whole system is based on the fact that you have no time, that you have no peace, that you have no self. And you who still feel something is missing, maybe you are not lost. Maybe you are awakened. And if you've made it to this point, it means something inside you is searching, not for instructions, not for a recipe, but maybe for a different rhythm, maybe for a different quality of existence. I can't promise you that you'll find it, but I can say that the search itself is already an act of courage. In a world that wants to lull you to sleep, searching is an act of rebellion, and maybe even love. But what happens when a person stops fighting? Not because they don't want to anymore, but because they can no longer believe that it makes sense. When life becomes an empty ritual, get up, work, survive, and none of these activities leads anywhere other than maintaining the illusion of functioning. That's when existential apathy appears, the most dangerous form of suffering. It's not pain that screams, it's silence that kills. Albert Camus once said that the only truly serious philosophical problem is suicide, the question of whether life is worth living. But the answer to this question is never purely logical. It's not an equation, it's a feeling. It's a silent rebellion, or silent acceptance of the absurdity of being. Some people escape into work, others into relationships, others into addictions. But there are those who don't escape anywhere. They simply endure, like ghosts in their own bodies, shadows of the people they once knew. And maybe that's when paradoxically the possibility of awakening is born. Because you can't be reborn unless you die, even symbolically. You can't truly live until you look death, that psychological, spiritual, existential one, straight in the eye. It's the moment when a person has nothing left to lose, and that's when freedom appears. Not the freedom sold on billboards, the freedom to choose a new phone, vacation, or career, but deep ontological freedom, the freedom of being no one. Freedom from expectations, from the illusion of success, from the compulsion to be someone. It's the freedom that comes after capitulation, after the breakdown of the ego, after the moment when you no longer have the strength to pretend. And then what happens? You begin to hear not the noise of the world, but your own breath, the rush of blood in your ears, the movement of thoughts, and then something quiet, but radical, may happen. From the inner emptiness, a new meaning is born, not the kind that can be written on a resume, but the kind that needs no witness.